Okay, so you sent over Genesis chapter 10 this week, and, I first look at it, it seemed like just a huge list of names I'd never even heard of.
Right.
But it's Genesis 10.
Yeah.
It's the Table of Nations.
But it is.
And the deeper I got into it, the more I realized it's not just a genealogy.
No.
It's really this window into history and human nature.
That's right.
And maybe even a peek at a much bigger picture.
Well, what's so fascinating is how this chapter lays the groundwork for so much of what we see later on.
Yeah.
Both in the Bible and in history.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is foundational in understanding the ancient world.
Right, so we're going deep on Genesis 10 this week.
Yes.
And we're going to see how the world was repopulated after the flood.
Right.
Starting with Noah's 3 sons.
Exactly.
Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
That's right.
We're going to trace their descendants, see where they went, what they did.
It's like watching the first migrations unfold.
Totally, like seeing the very first markings on a world map.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with Japheth. Now, your notes here say that his descendants mostly went north and west.
That's right, primarily into Europe and Asia.
Europe and Asia. Okay, so who are we talking about here?
Well, his sons are listed as Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras.
Whoa. Okay, a lot of names in there.
There are.
And I know a lot of these are hard to pin down precisely.
Yeah.
Like connecting them definitively to specific modern-day countries.
You got it.
But Javan is interesting because you mentioned he's often linked to the Greeks?
Yes, that's right. And specifically to the Ionians, who were early Greeks.
Oh, wow.
So that's a pretty direct connection.
So we're talking about the ancestors of, like, the philosophers and the artists and...
Absolutely, the founders of democracy.
Democracy. Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about.
And then you have Magog and Meshech.
Yeah.
Which you said come up again later in prophecy.
Yes, they do. And that's something we can dive into another time, but it just goes to show that this chapter isn't just a dry list of names.
Right.
It has these threads that run through the entire biblical narrative.
Totally. Like it's setting the stage for future events.
Exactly. And it shows that God's plan wasn't limited to just one area.
Yeah.
He was working with people all across the globe, even from the very beginning.
That's so cool. Okay. So Japheth's line is moving out, exploring new territories. Let's move on to Ham.
Okay.
Now his descendants seem to be more about establishing these powerful civilizations.
That's right. We see the beginnings of Egypt, Ethiopia, and even the land that would become Israel.
Yeah, how does that all break down?
Well, you have Cush, who's connected to Ethiopia.
Okay.
Specifically the ancient kingdom of Cush in Nubia, south of Egypt.
Oh, wow.
And then you have Mizraim, who's clearly linked to Egypt.
Okay.
And then Phut and Canaan. Canaan's descendants would eventually live in the land that was promised to Abraham.
Wow, so these are massive civilizations we're talking about here.
They are huge, influential cultures in the ancient world.
And it's crazy to think that they all came from this one branch of Noah's family.
Yeah, it is. It really highlights the diversity that emerged from a single source.
Totally. Okay, so within Ham's line, there's one guy who really stands out, Nimrod.
Yes. Nimrod, he's a fascinating character.
The text says he was like this mighty hunter before the Lord.
It does.
And the first great ruler on earth.
That's right. He built cities like Babel, Erech, and Nineveh.
Whoa, so he's like the OG empire builder.
Yeah, you could say that he's really a key figure in the development of human society after the flood.
And his name means, let us rebel.
It does.
And that feels important.
It adds this layer of complexity to his story.
Yeah, because on one hand, he's accomplishing all these incredible things.
Right.
Building cities, establishing power. But on the other hand, there's this hint of rebellion, this going against God's will.
It does make you wonder about the nature of ambition.
Yeah, like, is all ambition bad?
That's a great question, and I think the text is wrestling with that very idea because Nimrod's achievements are impressive.
They are.
But there's this underlying sense that his heart might not have been in the right place.
Yeah, like he was maybe more focused on his own glory than on honoring God.
Yeah. Exactly. And that tension between human ambition and divine will is something that plays out throughout history.
And it's something we all grapple with today.
It is. We all have ambitions and dreams.
Yeah.
But it's important to ask ourselves what's driving those ambitions.
Right. Are we trying to build our own little kingdoms? Or are we trying to use our talents to serve something bigger than ourselves?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is. All right. So we've got exploration with Japheth. We've got the rise of civilizations with Ham. Now let's talk about Shem.
Okay.
This is the line that leads to Abraham and eventually to Jesus.
That's right. It's often referred to as the line of promise.
So we're seeing the very beginnings of God's plan for redemption.
We are, and it's fascinating to see how it's all interwoven with these other stories.
Yeah, it's like this tiny seed that's planted in the midst of all this other stuff going on.
And from that seed grows this incredible tree.
Yeah, so who are Shem's key descendants?
Well, his sons are Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram.
Okay, a lot of unfamiliar names there.
There are
But the key one here is Arphaxad, right?
exactly, because it's through Arphaxad's line that we get to Abraham.
And Abraham is like the father of the Jewish people.
He is the one God chose to make a covenant with.
And through Abraham, we get the Israelites and eventually Jesus.
That's right.
Yeah.
It all goes back to that one line.
It's amazing how everything connects.
It is. It really shows the unity of humanity.
Yeah, and it reminds us that God's plan has been in motion from the very beginning.
Even amidst all the chaos and the rebellion.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about the three sons and their descendants, but there's this bigger picture here, this idea of God's sovereignty over nations.
Right.
You mentioned Acts 17:26, where it says that God made all nations from one blood
He did.
and that he determined their times and boundaries.
Yes, that's a powerful verse.
Of the rise and fall of empires, it's not random.
It's not.
God is ultimately in control,
And that can be a source of comfort.
especially when we look at the state of the world today.
I agree. It can be overwhelming to see all the conflict and division. But knowing that God is sovereign gives me a sense of peace.
Me too. Okay, so for everyone listening out there, what are the key takeaways from all this?
Well, I think the first takeaway is the unity of humanity.
Yeah.
We all come from the same family. We're all connected. And that should challenge us to see each other as brothers and sisters.
Absolutely, no matter our differences.
Exactly.
Okay, second takeaway, what about Nimrod? What can we learn from his story?
I think Nimrod's story teaches us to examine our ambitions,
Yeah.
to ask ourselves what's motivating us.
Are we seeking power for ourselves, or are we trying to use our gifts to serve others?
Right. Because ambition can be a good thing,
Yeah.
but it can also be a dangerous thing.
It can definitely lead us down the wrong path.
Exactly. So we need to be careful.
And finally, what about that thread of promise that runs through Shem's line? What does that tell us?
I think it tells us that God's plan is always in motion,
Yeah.
even when things look bleak.
Even when it seems like the world is falling apart.
Exactly. God is still working.
And he will ultimately accomplish his purposes.
He will.
So that's Genesis 10, the Table of Nations. It's a lot more than just a list of names.
It is. It's a story of our shared origins.
It's a story of ambition and rebellion.
And it's a story of God's unwavering faithfulness.
And it leaves us with a question for you, our listener. How does understanding these ancient stories shape the way you see the world today?
How does it impact your relationships with others?
And how does it inform your own ambitions and goals?
That's something for you to think about.
That's something to pray about.
And something to discuss with your friends and family.
We'll see you next time.